be here this morning, and thank you for inviting me along. And I hope you can hear me okay. I'm in the kitchen, and my wife has gone. We've just started meeting in our church building as well in the mornings, um, and and she went and she left the bread machine on, so it was knocking around in the background, but it's just stopped, so that was perfect timing. So hopefully there's not too much noise going on. I'd like to this morning look with you at Nehemiah, and so I'm going to read Nehemiah chapter 13. So I'll read the chapter together, and then I'll share a few thoughts with you. So Nehemiah chapter 13, and it's not the shortest of chapters, but we'll read the whole chapter together. And if you are aware of the situation with Nehemiah, Nehemiah went back to Jerusalem after the walls had been destroyed and flattened, and he encouraged all the people to rebuild the walls. And he rebuilds the walls, and then he helps the people in Jerusalem, and he encourages them to serve the Lord. And he's gone back to Shushan, the capital city where they've been taken away into captivity. And then he's come back again a second time to Jerusalem, and he's found that the people aren't quite living as they should be. And these are some of the issues that he deals with. So Nehemiah chapter 13 and verse 1. On that day, they read from the book of Moses in the hearing of the people. And it was found written that no Ammonite or Moabite should come into the assembly of God, because they had not met the children of Israel with bread and water, but hired Balaam against them to curse them. However, our God turned the curse into a blessing. So it was, when they heard the law, that they separated all the mixed multitude from Israel. Now, before this, Eliashib, the priest, having authority over the storerooms of the house of our God, was allied with Tobiah, and he had prepared for him a large room, where previously they had stored the grain offerings and the frankincense and the articles, the tithes of grain, the new wine and oil, which were commanded to be given to the Levites and singers and gatekeepers, and the offerings for the priests. But during all this, I was not in Jerusalem, for in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, I had to return to the king. Then after certain days, I obtained leave from the king, and I came to Jerusalem and discovered that the evil that Eliashib had done for Tobiah in preparing a room for him in the courts of the house of God, and it grieved me bitterly. Therefore I threw all the household goods of Tobiah out of the room. Then I commanded to cleanse the rooms, and I brought back into them the articles of the house of God, with grain offering and frankincense. I also realized that the portions of the Levites had not been given them, for each of the Levites and the singers who did the work had gone back to his field. So I contended with the rulers and said, why is the house of God forsaken? And I gathered them together and set them in their place. Then all Judah brought the tithe of the grain and the new wine and the oil to the storehouse. And I appointed as treasurers over the storehouse Shelemiah the priest and Zadok the scribe, and of the Levites Pedaiah. And next to them was Hanan, the son of Zachar, the son of Mattaniah, for they were considered faithful, and their task was to distribute to their brethren. Remember me, O my God, concerning this also, and do not wipe out my good deeds that I have done for the house of my God and for its service. In those days I saw the people of Judah treading wine presses on the Sabbath, and bringing in sheaves and loading donkeys with wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of burdens, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I warned them about that day on which they were selling provisions. Men of Tyre there also, who brought in fish and all kinds of goods, and sold them on the Sabbath to the children of Israel, the children of Judah, and in Jerusalem. Then I contended with the nobles of Judah and said to them, what evil is this that you do by which you profane the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers do thus? And did not our God bring all this disaster on us and on this city? Yet you bring added wrath on Israel by profaning the Sabbath. So it was at the gates of Jerusalem, as it began to be dark before the Sabbath, that I commanded the gates to be shut, and charged that they must not be opened till after the Sabbath. Then I posted some of my servants at the gates, so that no burdens would be brought in on the Sabbath day. Now the merchants and sellers of all kinds of wares lodged outside Jerusalem once or twice. Then I warned them and said to them, why do you spend the night round the wall? If you do so again, I will lay hands on you. From that time on, they came no more on the Sabbath, and I commanded the Levites that they should cleanse themselves, and that they should go and guard the gates and sanctify the Sabbath day. Remember me, O my God, concerning this also, and spare me according to the greatness of your mercy. In those days, I also saw Jews who had married some of Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. And half of their children spoke the language of Ashdod and could not speak the language of Judah, but spoke according to the language of one or other of the people. So I contended with them and cursed them and struck some of them and pulled out their hair and made them swear by God, saying, you shall not give your daughters as wives to their sons, nor take their daughters to your sons or yourselves. Did not Solomon, king of Israel, sin by these things? Yet among many nations there was no king like him, who was beloved of his God. And God made him king over all. Nevertheless, pagan women caused even him to sin. Should we then hear of your doing all this great evil, transgressing against our God by marrying pagan women? And one of the sons of Joiada, the son of Eliashib, the high priest, was a son-in-law of Sanballat the Horonite. Therefore, I drove him from me. Remember them, O my God, because they have defiled the priesthood and the covenant of the priesthood and the Levites. Thus, I cleanse them of everything pagan. I also assigned duties to the priests and the Levites, each to his service, and to bring the wood offering and the first fruits at appointed times. Remember me, O my God, for good. There we go. There's the chapter in the last chapter in Nehemiah, and it tells us about some of the struggles and some of the things that Nehemiah had to deal with. Now, if I were to ask you and to say what is the book of Nehemiah famous for, then I'm sure you'd know, wouldn't you? It's famous for rebuilding the wall of Jerusalem, the whole lot, all the way around, in 52 days. What an incredible feat! And it wasn't without its difficulties, but they had a mind to work, and they built this wall. And if I had to ask you what is a wall for, then I'm sure you'd know as well. You know, the reason they built the walls around the cities in those days was to build a form of defense. So when the enemy came, they've got this wall to defend them, to protect them from the enemy without. Now then, there's a tougher question, and you can think about this one. How many walls did Nehemiah build? Well, you might say, well, he built the wall around Jerusalem. Of course, well, he built the one wall. Well, actually, I'd suggest to you that Nehemiah built two walls. Yes, he built the wall around Jerusalem, but he also was seeking to build a spiritual defense, a spiritual wall around the people. And in a way, building the wall, the physical wall around Jerusalem, is a picture of the spiritual wall that Nehemiah was seeking to build around the people so that they would be protected. Which one do you think was harder to build? Building that physical wall was a huge feat, wasn't it? And yet building that spiritual wall was also a very big task, and maybe even harder. Just let me just give you some context for this. What is a city without a wall? Now, if we were to go back right to the beginning of Nehemiah, you would see there that when some of Nehemiah's brethren, his friends, family members, they come and see Nehemiah when Nehemiah is miles, hundreds and hundreds of miles away in Shushan, the capital city of the nation that had come in and taken them away captive a number of years before. And we read there that they give a report to him, and they say the survivors who are left in the captivity in the province are there in great distress and reproach. Why? The wall of Jerusalem also is broken down, its gates are burned with fire. So there's distress, There's reproach. Now, this is a city that doesn't have a wall around it. In chapter 2, when Nehemiah is speaking to the king, he says, "Why should my face not be sad when the city, the place of my father's tombs, lies waste and its gates are burned with fire?" Here he is, he's saying, look at the situation here. I am sad because my city at home, its gates are burned, its walls flat. And then when he goes back to Jerusalem and he's encouraging all the people there and he's saying, look, let's build. And you see, he says in verse 17 of chapter 2, you see the distress that we are in. Now Jerusalem lies waste and its gates are burned with fire. Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem that we may no longer be a reproach. So what is a city where its walls are flat? It's a place of distress. There's worry. There's insecurity. There's no protection. There's that constant they might come. There's reproach. There's no glory. People would pass by and say, oh, see that city? Remember what it used to be? Look at it now. It's a reproach. It's a shame. It's waste. I mean, it could have been so much more, this city. But what is it now? It's just lying waste. And there was sorrow, there was sadness. It didn't bring joy to them. It didn't bring gladness. And that's what a city is like, where its walls are flat. It's a place of distress, reproach, waste, and sorrow. Let's look at the flip side of that. What is a city that has a wall? Now, in Nehemiah chapter 12, after they've built the wall, they then have this dedication service. And they dedicate the walls. And in verse 43, and it says, also that day they offered great sacrifices and rejoiced. For God had made them rejoice with great joy. The women and the children also rejoiced, so that the joy of Jerusalem was heard afar off. So on the one hand, a city that is flattened and its walls are destroyed, it's a terrible place to be. But on the other hand, a city where its walls are built, it's a place of rejoicing. There's thankfulness. It's a place of joy. Now, were all their problems over? No, they weren't. But still, it was a place of joy. There was rejoicing. There was a deep happiness inside. It's a place of confidence, place of protection, place of peace. And that's what they're experiencing. When those walls are built, they're saying, let's rejoice. We're safe. We're happy. And actually, when you look at it and you see, when the walls were built, it was a catalyst to a whole load of other things happening. So in chapter 8, they read the law. Again in chapter 8, they keep the Feast of Tabernacles. Chapter 9, they confess their sins. Chapter 10, they make this covenant, this promise, where they say, God, we're going to serve you. And that's all flowed out from the walls have been built. And now here they are, they're wanting to serve God. And after these walls have been built, the enemies that were all around them, they become disheartened, they become discouraged. It says they were very disheartened. Now, that in a way is a picture of us. That city, the walls with a defense or the walls flattened, is a picture of us spiritually. Somebody who has a wall around their life, that spiritual defense is that there's a place of rejoicing. There's joy in that person's life. There's confidence. There's that sense of protection. But for someone who doesn't have that spiritual wall around their life, where it's collapsed, there isn't that spiritual defense. It's a place of distress, of worry, insecurity. There's no glory. It's a waste of life. It could be so much more, but it's kind of wasting and it's sad and it's sorrowful. There's a proverb. Let me read this proverb to you. Proverbs chapter 25, verse 28. It says, whoever has no rule over his spirit is like a city broken down without walls. That's a key verse. Whoever has no rule over his spirit is like a city broken down without walls. Because there's no walls, there's no defense. Anything can just come flooding in. And it's not a place of security. So this morning, I'd just like to think about that picture of somebody with a wall. that spiritual defense around them, or somebody who should have that spiritual defense around them, but it's crumbled? And which one are we like? And if we are like the crumbled wall, how can we become like the wall, the city with a wall around it where there's defense? Well, let's just take a look and see what happened to these uh, Jews, these Israelites here. But in chapter 13, we read just a few moments ago, you can see that there were several issues they faced. Nehemiah, as I said, he'd been back to Shushan, which is hundreds and hundreds of miles away. He's there for some time, and then he comes back. And when he comes back to Jerusalem, he finds that he'd been encouraging the people to walk with God and to follow God as they should. But when he gets back, he sees that their lives have crumbled. Their walk with God has slowed. They've been doing things that really they shouldn't have been doing or allowing. What was the sin in their life? Well, look at verse 3. There's three areas really we can look at. Verse 11, sorry. We see that the temple is forsaken. The temple is forsaken. Eliashib, he was the priest there. He'd given rooms to Tobiah. Now, if you know anything about the story of Nehemiah, there were a number of enemies, and Tobiah was one of these enemies. And so he's given Tobiah, one of these enemies, one of the rooms in the temple. Now, that room should have been used for storing things for the Levites, where the tithes would be put. And now, because there's no tithes being brought into the Levites can't afford to stay and work in the temple. So they've had to go back to their own lands that we see in verse 10, just so they can eat, so they can get some food. And so you see here, the worship in the temple is all starting to fall apart. The Levites are having to leave to go back and work in the fields to get some food because people aren't worshipping in the temple as they should do. So the first thing is the temple is forsaken. The second thing is we see in verse 17, the Sabbath day was to be a holy day for them. But the Sabbath day we read is, verse 17 says it's profaned. They're just treating it like any other day. They're treading out their wine presses, they're bringing in their sheaves, they're loading up their donkeys, they're selling, they're buying. All these other nations around them are coming in and doing their business. And you know what the issue is? They're just concerned about their own welfare and their prosperity. And they see the Sabbath day as just a day where they say, great, another day where I can serve myself. So the Sabbath is profaned. The temple has been forsaken. The Sabbath is profaned. And then thirdly, the third issue that we read about in chapter 13 is in verse 27, where all these people have started intermarrying with the other nations around. And so we see there that Nehemiah says they've transgressed. They've married women from Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. And they've intermingled so much that half of their children could no longer speak the Hebrew language. They're just diluting their heritage of who they are. So three areas: the temple, the Sabbath, and then their marriages, their relationships with the surrounding nations around them. What should it have been? How did God command that they should have walked? Well, the temple, what is the temple? That's the place where they should have been coming to worship God. It's the provision that God had created whereby people could come to him and have a real relationship with him. A place where they could worship him and praise him. That's what the temple should have been, a place of worship. What should the Sabbath have been? The Sabbath shouldn't have been, oh, no, it's a Sabbath day again. Oh, no, we can't do such and such. The Sabbath should have been something where they're saying, yes, praise the Lord, it's the Sabbath. In Isaiah 58, we read there, call the Sabbath a delight, the holy day of the Lord. And you shall honor him, not doing your own ways, not finding your own pleasure, nor speaking your own words. Then you shall delight yourself in the Lord, and I will cause you to ride on the high hills of the earth and feed you with the heritage of Jacob your father. He's saying, look, make the Sabbath my day. It's my day. Delight in it, and I'll bless you. This is what the Sabbath should have been for them. But instead, they park it, they put it to one side, and they just use it to feed themselves. And then lastly, their marriages, what should it have been? What's that showing? It's showing where their love is. Who should they have loved first, above all else? Well, we read, don't we? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, your strength. And yet here they are. They're loving these other women, these other nations. They're getting involved in them, and they're placing their love on them more than their love is towards God. So you can see what's wrong. The temple, the place where they should be worshipping, well, it's not the desire of their hearts to worship. The Sabbath, the day that they should delight in the Lord, well, we can see delighting in the Lord is not the desire of their heart. And we see by the marriages, to love the Lord above all else was not the desire of their hearts. And their hearts are going to be turned away because they set their affection on other things. As we look at it, what do we think? As we look at these Israelites and we say, oh dear, what a shame, they're messing up, aren't they? Why couldn't they just walk the right way? They've slipped up here, they've messed up there. How do we see it? Well, the question is, how does God see it? In verse 17, we see that God says it's evil. That's how God sees it. It's evil how you're treating the temple. Again, in verse 17, we see it's evil how you're treating the Sabbath. And verse 27 says, look, this is a great evil. You see, sin is not just this mediocre, well, it's not ideal. I wish it could be a bit different, but no, God says, look, compared to my standard, this is seriously wrong. How on earth do they get to this state? You see, because I want you to be asking the question to yourself. If this is what they could do, after Nehemiah had built the physical wall and then taken the time to build the spiritual wall around them, that crumbled so quickly. If it could crumble so quickly in their life, is it possible that it could crumble in my life? And from my own experience, I have to say, it's all too easy for it to crumble. I don't really have to do anything, and it seems like the wall starts to crumble, and the enemy starts to come in, and the joy starts to flow out, and the insecurities grow, and the worry, and the sadness, because the wall in my life is crumbling. What did they do? How did it get to the stage where it crumbled? Well, as I mentioned earlier, a few moments ago, remember the enemies that were around in the surrounding area, and some from Samaria? What had they done? In chapter 6, verse 18, I'll read the verse to you. It says, for many in Judah were pledged to Tobiah. Now, Tobiah is one of their enemies. After a while, they've made this allegiance with Tobiah. This is how. Because he was the son-in-law of Shechaniah, the son of Ara, the son of Johanan. He'd married the daughter of Meshullam, the son of Berechiah. So here they are. Do you remember? They're marrying people from other nations. Do you know what they've done? They've intermarried with their enemies' children. Isn't that a crazy thing to do? But they've become allied to the enemy. Now we look at that and say, surely they would be. Well, what on earth would possess them to do that type of thing? They're sworn enemy, and yet they allied themselves in marriage. But they've become allied to the enemy. You know, you can see in the chapter that we read, the priest, what had he done? He'd given storerooms to Tobiah in the temple. Now, remember, this is Tobiah who wanted to kill Nehemiah, who wanted to stop the city walls being built. And now here he is. First of all, they make this allegiance with him. And then it's not long before he's come right into the heart of the city. He's in the temple, right in the temple. And he's got a storeroom there. Can you see what's happening? Little by little, the enemy comes in. And he ends up right at the center. And that's a warning for me. Little by little, I can make compromises. We can make excuses. And before we know it, we got things right in our very hearts. that should never be there. The enemy is right inside because of compromise. It just seemed to be that that was the pattern of life that adopted. And slowly, slowly by slowly, things just happened. Maybe it wasn't, one day there, Tobias out there with his sword and saying, I'm going to knock this city down, I'm going to kill Nehemiah. The very next day they say, Tobiah, come and live in the temple. No, it wasn't like that. It was this process, little by little, step by step. And that's how it is with us, isn't it? Rarely do we jump off the deep end straight into sin. Instead, it's just little by little, step by step. And before we know it, we're in the deep end, but because we've taken step by step by step to have got there. Well, how did Nehemiah put it right? What did he do to address this issue? First little thing I'd like you to see is that he realized what sin was. He saw sin for what it really was. In verse 8 of chapter 13, Nehemiah says, it grieved me bitterly. He looks at their state and he says, oh, this hurts so much. What you're doing, oh, it's hurting me. You know my trouble, and maybe you've experienced this too. I can sin and it doesn't grieve me as it should grieve me. Maybe I don't view sin as seriously as I should view sin. It doesn't hurt me, and maybe it doesn't hurt you as much as it should hurt you. Because little by little, you've become inoculated to it. You've become used to it. You've become comfortable with it. And this is what's happened here. But Nehemiah says, no, this is grieving me. You've got to see it for what it really is. And then you see the second thing he does. So he sees sin for what it really is. The second thing is he fights against it. There's a word that comes up 3 times in verse 11, verse 17, and verse 25. With regard to the temple, he says, I contended with the rulers. On the Sabbath, he says, I contended with the nobles. With the marriages, he said, I contended with the people. What's he doing? Contending. It's like he's fighting. He's saying, look, I'm not just going to sit by and just say, oh, this is how it is. What can we do? We just have to accept the situation today. Now he's saying, no, this is how it is, but it shouldn't be like this. Let's correct this. Let's go out with some energy and fight for what is right. Fight to get rid of what is wrong. And contending with those people, contending with those issues, it may not have made him friends in some way. People may have been hurt by it. And when we deal with sin, it may not be comfortable for us to deal with sin. It might hurt us. Surely it should hurt us. But that's what we need sometimes. We need surgery. Do you remember Jesus when he was saying, if your hand causes you to sin, you need surgery. You need to deal with it. You need to chop it off. Now, he wasn't saying you need to chop your hand off. What he's saying there is you need to chop out that area in your life where there is sin. And this is what Nehemiah is saying. Look, surgery is what you need. Let's contend. Let's fight for it. And then he says, look, let's build up these walls again. The walls that have come crashing down, let's build them up again. So what do you do with the temple? He says, let's get rid of Tobiah. Let's throw him out. Let's cleanse it. Let's bring the correct stuff back in. Let's put faithful men in charge. So you see what he's doing? He's getting rid of the old and he's bringing in back in the new. With the Sabbath, he says, look, let's shut these gates. I'm not going to allow the traders to hang around the outside for the day. Let's get rid of them. It's got to be dealt with. Let's build up this wall. Let's make the Sabbath what it should be again. Let's rejoice together in God. Rejoice with each other, worshipping in the temple. And then with the marriages, he's saying, look, we've got to deal with this. And he made them promise that they wouldn't give their own children in marriage to those other surrounding nations. You see what he's doing? He's saying, look, I know it's slipped. I know the walls come crumbling down around your life, but let's build it up again. Let's have that courage and that conviction. So as we draw to a close and we think about ourselves, can you see how that wall around that city is a picture of us? And I want you to ask yourself this morning, what best describes you? How do you feel? Do you feel distressed? Do you feel like your life is just wasting? Your approach, there's no glory, there's sorrow. Or maybe it's because the walls have come crumbling down and the enemy's been allowed to get in and get a foothold in your heart. Oh, or is your life a life where there's joy and you're saying, oh, this is so great to know the Lord, to be close to him. And there's a thankfulness and there's a peace and there's a security. Which one is your heart like? The reality probably is that you want there to be the wall all fully built up. But if you're like me, it's a constant job. Oh, this bit's crumbled down. Oh, this bit's crumbled. Oh, I need to deal with that. Oh, this bit's crumbled down. I need to deal with that. Let's build up the wall there again. Let's build up the wall there again. I was reading a book by Helen Roosevelt. She was a missionary in Africa for a large part of her life. And in this book, she was sharing in a very real and open way. She was saying, my joy in the Lord just wasn't there. I wanted it to be there, but I just didn't have this joy in the Lord. And so she started examining and saying, what was it that was causing there not to be the joy? Was there some big sin, some big issue that she was just blind to? And over time, she came to realize it wasn't like it was one big thing. It was a case of a number of small things, little things, where she just allowed the standard to slip, where she just allowed the enemy to hop in unawares, and it's starting to make home in her life. And she said, I realized these little things that I was comfortable with, I needed to deal with them. I needed to build up the wall. Do you remember Nehemiah in this chapter? Several times he says, remember me, O God. I'm doing this. I'm seeking to build up these walls. I'm seeking to serve you well. What's my motivation for doing it? Oh, that I might please you. That you would remember me for good. And you know, as we look at our lives, if you feel, oh, the wall has been crumbling, don't just throw up your hands and say, oh, well, what can I do? Instead, lift up your eyes to the Lord. And remember, Jesus said, I am with you. That he loves us. That he can wash us and cleanse us and forgive us. The Holy Spirit can live within us and does live within us if we're Christians, giving us the ability to build up those walls and to love and serve him as we should. So there's just a little picture of Nehemiah and those walls. And I hope you found that helpful and encouraging. And it's been a challenge to me to consider, Ross, build up the walls in your life. Don't be like a person where the wall has collapsed, where the enemy can just come traipsing in. And do it so you're serving the Lord and you're putting him first. Thank you. Back over to you.